The election day is upon us. Tomorrow, November 7th, cities and towns all over the country will be casting their vote towards their favorite local candidates. So how important are these local elections to your life? And what needs to be done to fix voter apathy? But first, have you ever wondered why November is the month of elections? And is it time to change that? To answer these questions and more is Dr. Paul Robinson from the Department of History at Bridgewater State University. In 1792, Congress passed the law that elections can be held at any time during the month of November, as long as the elections were before the first Wednesday of December.
The things when the Constitution was created, things took forever, and they wanted to have new turnover, when the new year started.
But then, as communications got easier among states, this rule proved to be problematic, as earlier elections results were believed to influence states that had not voted yet. So in 1845, Congress changed the rule. The rule is simple. Elections can be held either the first Tuesday in the month of November or the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. This means as early as November 2nd and as late as November 8th.
Before that, it was just haphazard. It was just no one wanted to tell states what to do, so every state did it differently.
Reading about why November, something that stood out to me was they talked about harvesting was almost done. Mm-hmm. People were almost finished with harvesting. And also the winter months were not, winter was not here yet, per se. And also they didn't want people to be out there voting on Sundays or traveling on Sundays. So it seems like all those reasons, yes, they worked for that time period, but now so many things have changed. Should we keep November? Should we keep the same rules? Do they apply?
I think one thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to November, when it comes to Tuesday, when it comes to all these things, you have to remember that in the United States, the goal has often been to limit the amount of voting as much as it's been to expand it, right? When the vote was granted with the Constitution, it was only to a very select amount of people, right? And the parties and the elites were really resistant to expanding the number of people who could vote and the qualifications, and resistant to make it easier to vote. The idea that anyone can vote it's true in theory, but in practice it turns out to be a little more complicated. Felons often lose the right to vote, and then bureaucratic errors with people with the same names as a felon often get excluded. And is that just coincidence? Is it error? Is it some sort of nefarious scheme? There's arguments that can be made on all sides of this.
So is it that voter apathy that we are experiencing, it's not necessarily that voters do not want to vote, rather than our system limits people to vote?
Well, it's both. Let's be clear, voter apathy is real. Interesting thing is, in 1800, in the 1820s, especially with Andrew Jackson's elections, he was such a polarizing figure, and there was so much nasty mudslinging, and there were so many allegations and claims that he had, multiple wives, and that he was, just a total, going to destroy the country. That actually got people to turn out more when things got nasty. I think today you often hear, at least, that because politics are so nasty that it turns people off. And so it'd be interesting to think that, what got people interested in voting, a couple hundred years ago, maybe isn't what gets people to vote today. There are so many factors that do have the result of keeping people from voting. And so it's not just one, it's not just an easy fix.
Who do you think benefits from voter apathy?
I think the politicians on all sides benefit when they don't have to worry about the voters as much as they have to worry about maybe campaign donors or their own interests. If they can feel like they're going to say something in an election or choose a policy that their people won't like, but they're not going to be punished for it at the polls, right? that benefits them. It also it benefits who's already in power, whatever party, right? If voter turnout is low, it generally favors incumbents. So people who are already in office have a tremendous advantage, just with name recognition and getting, maybe a core group of people to turn out.
Now, let's get back to the elections, and especially the local elections. How important are they in somebody's life? That I think people fail to see the direct link between the person I'm voting and how this person is going to impact my life.
You don't really think about it too much until something goes bad and some conservation laws get changed or something, or somebody wants to build a restaurant and there's rules against it and regulations, and somebody maybe wants to change those, or about zoning and where your house is going to be. One of the biggest things about these local elections is how your town's going to get funded. Are you going to raise taxes? How are you going to raise money for things? And in the town I live, they actually said that aside from taxing of local businesses, the biggest income for the town is ambulance service, right? And that's how the town makes money. And so they literally have an interest in people getting hurt and injured, so they have to pay for the ambulance, and that goes back into the town, and the town can raise money that way. And so, and so if you don't think about this, if you don't know about it, if you don't go and show up, that just seems a little twisted. And so maybe you get involved, you think of a better way for the town to kind of raise money other than, charging a lot for ambulance service.
Now, would you say the local elections are actually the most important ones versus like voting for governor or voting for president?
It can very much depend. If you want to have an influence on elections, these local ones are the place where it's much more likely to happen, where just the turnout of a few dozen people can totally sway something. And this is a big deal, right? Mass transit. I mean, this was a vote in Austin for light rail, which is mass transit. Imagine if you were voting on expanding the T or something, right? And how that might change your life, for better or for worse. However. But to think of the daily impact it could have on your life, on your standard of living and the way you get to your job and things. Sure, it's not going to be a Supreme Court choice. Sure, it's not going to be immigration policy for the whole nation. But your daily life, it's your vote, and to sort of not pay attention. It can be costly.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up the electoral votes. So, another rhetoric that we hear is that your vote counts. Right? Like, that's just the number one American statement. Your vote counts. So once again, if millions and millions of people vote for somebody and then that somebody doesn't win, are we undermining our democracy? Because then, once again, you voted, but at the end of the day, I'm putting your vote to the side and I'm going with what I think will be best for you.
Right. Now, one thing is that you can certainly see it that way. Another way to see it, though, is that this system that the framers of the Constitution made was so heavily dependent on the states, right? And so while the popular vote in the country was, didn't match up with the electoral vote. In each state's electoral votes reflected its popular vote. If the vote was just a straight up popular vote, there's a lot of reasons to have that, right? That would make a lot of people feel good, right? The Electoral College certainly does throw a damper on it. And I think part of the reason it's still there, it's tradition, right? It's this, so much of the Constitution has been shown to be pretty good. Now, a lot of it has changed, a lot of it has been thrown out too. But the idea of getting rid of this part of the Constitution that the framers thought was really pretty super important, it might rub a lot of people the wrong way.
You mentioned tradition, so it seems like, okay, tradition, they can either be good or bad. Society is changing. Now, it's something like electoral votes, a tradition that we should keep.
Well, listen, if you're asking me as a historian, I think it's great when things change,
Yeah.
It'll make it really super interesting. But I also like to just look at the idea to get rid of it is, one thing you have to do is you have to have, you'd have to have Congress, you'd have to have a tremendous amount of effort gone into changing the Constitution. And the only problem with that is this vote, it benefited the Republican Party this time, right? But who's to say in the future it might benefit the Democratic Party? You don't know, right? So with the two parties in power, you know, neither one necessarily wants to get rid of something that might help them in the future, right? Oh, it harmed us this time, but what about elections in the future, you know?
Now, other states do observe the election day. They take the day off. It's considered a civic holiday. Some have mandated their the employers to give their employees some couple of hours without any miss of pay. Should the same thing be implemented in our state, or maybe throughout the entire country? So since we are all doing the same thing this particular day, should we try to make it easier, and the laws should be uniform throughout the entire country?
That's always good, and when election laws have been uniform, turnout's gone up over the years. You know, this is what they've done over the centuries, and I think it'd be great. I mean, now technically, still everyone has the right, you know, to not be penalized for voting, and they're allowed to do it. I think it'd be great, right? The thing is that the people are going to have to demand this. Right, and like I've said before, you know, the reluctance to change voting laws is always, you know, by the people already in office, and you know, you look at suffrage, women's suffrage, you look at civil rights, right? People had to be attacked, they had to be killed before things would change, right? And people on the ground had to do that.
Thank you so much
Anytime.
for taking your time.
So please do not forget to vote tomorrow for your favorite candidates, those you think are going to bring the positive changes you want in your life. Reporting from WCTV, I am Queen Banda.